Her niece humiliated her at the Thanksgiving table, then tried to sell the house her aunt had paid for. Eleanor Monroe, a retired teacher and quiet widow, didn't argue. Rachel, the niece she once raised like a daughter, smiled for the real estate photos and signed the papers as if history had no witnesses. But Eleanor's name still lived on the deed, etched beside the years Rachel had tried to erase. By the time the buyers arrived, the sale froze, the story cracked open, and the truth stood in ink. She wasn't the forgotten aunt anymore. She was the foundation. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The smell of roasted turkey and brown sugar-glazed carrots drifted through the wide hallways of Rachel Adler's colonial-style home, the kind that made realtors drool and neighbors whisper. Eleanor stepped through the front door, her boots clicking softly on the polished wood floor. Everything gleamed, the floors, the countertops, even Rachel's diamond studs. It was all very curated. She handed off her coat to someone, Rachel's niece, maybe, and followed the hum of voices toward the dining room. There were candles in brass holders, pine cone garlands, little handwritten name cards at each place. A Martha Stewart fever dream. "Eleanor, you made it," Rachel called from the kitchen, her voice syrupy but tight, like a violin string pulled just a little too far. "Wouldn't miss it," Eleanor replied, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She stepped in for a light 2-second hug that smelled of cinnamon and Chanel. The house was packed, a dozen or more people, cousins, neighbors, co-workers. She recognized most of them from Rachel's carefully staged Facebook photos. Ben, Rachel's husband, was swirling wine and telling a story to a man in a checked shirt. Their daughter Lily sat near the fireplace, pretending to read while her earbuds were very clearly in. And Georgia, Rachel's sister, was topping off a glass with Pinot Noir, eyes already glassy. Dinner was served like a ceremony. Every plate was identical, from the sculpted dollops of mashed potatoes to the sprigs of thyme tucked beside the turkey slices. Rachel moved around the table like a hostess on a lifestyle show, performing warmth in front of an invisible camera. But the chill beneath it all was unmistakable to Eleanor. Ben raised his glass for a toast. To family, old friends, and making it through another year. They clinked glasses. Laughter. Someone made a joke about the cranberry sauce not being homemade, and Rachel laughed a little too hard. Then the conversation drifted, as it always did, to the past. "It's wild to think how far we've all come," said Georgia, her words slightly slurred. "Remember that old apartment in Syracuse? The one where the pipes froze?" "I remember," said Ben, chuckling. "We had to boil water just to wash dishes." Rachel smiled at him, then turned her smile into a dagger. "Well," she said, reaching for more stuffing, "Mom never really built anything herself. It was always hand-me-downs or help. She meant well, but, you know. She was more of a drifter than a doer." The room fell quiet, not immediately, but in that slow creeping way that spreads like fog. Ben gave a soft, automatic chuckle. Not defending, not denying, just filling the air. Lily's fork hovered mid-air. Her lips were pressed together in a hard, thin line. Georgia didn't even look up. She just muttered under her breath. She shouldn't have said that. Eleanor looked at Rachel, and for a second, just a second, she saw it. The curl of satisfaction at the edge of her mouth. The pleasure in the wound she'd just reopened. The woman Rachel was talking about, the one she'd casually dismissed like an afterthought, was Eleanor's late sister. Margaret, Rachel's own mother. A woman who'd worked 2 jobs to keep them fed. Who'd stayed in that freezing apartment and bought second-hand coats and borrowed rent money because Rachel needed braces. Because Georgia wanted dance lessons. Because family back then still meant something. Eleanor set down her wine glass. "Funny," she said, voice steady. "I remember Margaret raising 2 daughters by herself. I remember her cutting coupons, patching jeans, making dinner stretch across 3 days. She didn't have much, but she gave everything she had." Rachel blinked. The smile on her face cracked, barely. "I wasn't saying she didn't try," she replied, lightly, though her eyes were sharp now, focused. "Just, you know, she didn't exactly leave a legacy." She left 2 daughters, Eleanor said. One of them lives in a house like this. Seems like a legacy to me. A pause. Then Georgia raised her glass. To Margaret, a few others awkwardly joined in. Ben sipped without speaking. Lily's eyes dropped to her plate, red creeping into her cheeks. Rachel said nothing. She reached for the bottle, poured herself another glass, and turned the conversation to someone's new job at a tech startup. But the warmth had drained from her voice. She didn't look at Eleanor again. Not once. And Eleanor, she just sat there, surrounded by gold-trimmed plates and flickering candlelight, and thought that was only the beginning. The scent of turkey was gone. Eleanor could still feel it in her hair, along with the hollow echo of Rachel's voice replaying in her head. That smug little dismissal of Margaret, like she'd been an old sweater no one missed. Back at her condo, Eleanor poured herself a glass of water, left it untouched, and walked to the drawer where she kept the black file folder. It hadn't been opened in years. Inside was a mess of documents, tax returns, health insurance statements, photocopies of her passport. She didn't know exactly what had made her go looking for it, not yet. But something had shifted at that table, deep beneath the good china and well-practiced smiles. Something was coming unglued. She found it on the 3rd try. Property transfer, 12127 Hillview Court. A house deed dated December 3rd, 12 years ago. Signed by Eleanor Monroe. Co-signed by First Community Bank. Rachel Adler listed as occupant. The handwriting was hers. The money had been hers too. $42,000 for the down payment. Rachel and Ben were just 26, newly married, with a baby on the way. Ben had just lost his job. Rachel was still waitressing and finishing her last semester of nursing school. They were sinking. She'd called Eleanor crying, humiliated, asking for help. I'll pay it back, I swear, just until we catch up. You'll never have to mention it again. And she hadn't, not once. For 12 years, Eleanor had kept quiet. Through Rachel's promotions, her Instagram renovations, her insufferable Thanksgiving tablescapes. Not even when Rachel boasted about how they'd built everything from scratch. Not even when Ben gave that little speech last Christmas about starting with nothing and fighting for every inch. She'd let them have their story, but now, in the dim light of her kitchen, that story felt like a cut she hadn't realized was bleeding until someone pressed on it. She flipped to the last page of the deed. No co-owner listing. No legal tie to the house, just her signature and the loan that had been paid off 6 years ago. By Rachel, apparently. Full ownership transferred. Quietly, cleanly. Eleanor Monroe, initial guarantor. No current legal claim. She closed the folder too slowly. The next morning, she called Georgia. You free tonight? Georgia showed up with a bottle of red, hair scraped into a lopsided bun, wearing sweatpants and a coat that had lost its shape. Eleanor poured drinks, no music, no pretense. She didn't ease into it. She slid the folder across the table like she was handing over evidence. Georgia scanned the top few pages, then stopped. Holy hell, she muttered. You paid for the house, Eleanor nodded once. Down payment, co-signed the loan. She was pregnant. They were broke. She called me in the middle of the night, sobbing into her phone. I'd just gotten the teaching job at Westbrook. It felt like the right thing. Georgia leaned back in her chair, eyes still fixed on the page. And she never said a damn word. She needed help. I gave it, not a lecture. Georgia laughed, dry, low. She didn't just forget. She erased you with linen napkins and centerpieces. Eleanor exhaled slowly, staring at her untouched wine. And I let her. For a while, they sat in silence. Outside, a few leaves scraped against the windows like the start of winter. Somewhere in the building, someone was frying onions. Life moved on, uncaring. She bought me a bottle of perfume last year, Eleanor said suddenly. Said it was a thank you for helping out when Lily was born. I thought she meant the hospital visits. I didn't even realize. That wasn't a thank you, Georgia said. That was hush money. That line hit harder than she wanted it to. But she didn't flinch. She got up, walked back to her desk, and retrieved a faded manila envelope. It was something she hadn't touched in years. Old pay stubs, letters from Margaret, a few notes Rachel had written back when they were still something like close. Before Rachel married Ben, before the house, before the story got edited, She flipped through until she found the thing she didn't know she'd been hoping for. A printout. The email thread from the loan officer. Eleanor had been the one to contact the bank, the one to submit the first payment, the one who had taken the risk. Georgia glanced over her shoulder. You could bury her with that. Eleanor didn't answer. She tucked the email back into the envelope. The damage wasn't just financial, it was something deeper, colder. A betrayal written in blank spaces and signatures that no longer mattered. She never even asked me over, she said finally. Not until last night. Georgia narrowed her eyes. Because she thought you wouldn't remember, or wouldn't care. Eleanor looked up, her face calm. She was wrong on both counts. 3 days after the wine-soaked conversation with Georgia, Eleanor's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She let it ring twice before answering. Eleanor Monroe? Yes. This is Mark Cutler from First Community Mortgage. I just wanted to confirm some details regarding an application submitted by Rachel Adler and Benjamin Adler. You're listed as co-owner of the property at 1227 Hillview Court. Her hand tightened around the phone. I haven't lived there, ever. I understand, but your name is still legally on the title. And our underwriter flagged the application as incomplete unless you submit a formal quitclaim deed. Eleanor leaned against the kitchen counter. The early November sunlight streamed through the blinds, slicing across her bare floor in narrow lines. She applied to refinance. Yes, ma'am, 2 weeks ago. Application was declined yesterday, pending full title clarification. We sent notice to all title holders. You should have received something from the county, too. I did, she said softly. I thought it was a mistake. The man on the other end hesitated. It's actually not uncommon. People co-sign, help family, forget to update the title. But legally, you're still listed as 50% owner, not guarantor, owner. Eleanor almost laughed, but it didn't come out. Thank you, Mr. Cutler. That's all I needed. She hung up. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She simply went back to the drawer, retrieved the folder again, and slid it onto the table like laying down a final card in a high-stakes game. Owner, not guarantor, not invisible, not erased. And Rachel had known, or had gambled, she wouldn't notice. Either way, she'd signed a legal document under the illusion that Eleanor no longer mattered. Georgia showed up that night with takeout and a face full of questions. They sat on Eleanor's floor, curtains open between them, watching city lights flicker beyond the window like distant warnings. She filed to refinance? Georgia asked. Fork paused midair. Behind your back? Eleanor nodded. Application failed because I'm still on the title. Mark confirmed it. I co-signed the loan, but I also retained ownership. It was part of the agreement. She either never read the fine print, or she hoped no one else ever would. Georgia let out a low whistle. You're not just a signature anymore. You're the whole damn wall holding the house up. She was counting on me to forget. She was counting on you to be exactly what she said you were, Georgia said, pointing her fork like a knife. Empty. Eleanor didn't look away. She's living on my full signature. The phrase hung between them, sharp and quiet. Georgia reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope Eleanor hadn't seen before. Here, she said, sliding it across. I pulled county records. You're still receiving annual tax statements. The name's tiny at the bottom, but it's there. You've been co-paying for property insurance without even knowing it. Eleanor opened the folder and scanned the documents. Her name. Her mailing address. Every year the statements came to her. Redirected, ignored, automated. 12 years of silence and indirect theft. She's never asked, Eleanor said. Not once, not a single letter. No request to sign off or transfer ownership. Because asking you would have acknowledged you still mattered. That line settled in Eleanor's spine like a nail being tapped into place. She got up, walked to her laptop, and opened a blank document. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, then began to type. Subject: legal inquiry regarding co-ownership and title dispute. It wasn't a threat. Not yet. But it would be enough to freeze everything Rachel thought she controlled. Enough to require signatures, disclosures, and conversations she could no longer avoid. Enough to bring Eleanor's name back into the conversation, not as a ghost, but as a force. I'm sending this to a real estate attorney in the morning, Eleanor said, eyes still locked on the screen. Just an inquiry, but it'll flag her refinance for review with the bank. And if she tries to sell or remortgage again? She won't be able to, Georgia said, finishing the sentence. Not without your name, not without your permission. Eleanor closed the laptop. Exactly. A quiet settled over the room. No triumph, just clarity. Eleanor felt it deep in her bones, not just the power, but the rightness of holding her place again, of no longer being a footnote in Rachel's success story. She hadn't asked for this, but now that it was in front of her, she wasn't stepping aside. Not this time. It was a neighbor's text that tipped her off. Hey, Eleanor. Weird question. Did Rachel sell the house already? Saw a couple touring it with a realtor yesterday. Thought of you. Eleanor blinked at the message, rereading it twice. She hadn't even sent the legal letter yet. It was still sitting in her drafts, waiting for Monday morning. And yet, Rachel was already making moves. Fast ones. She opened her laptop, clicked through to the major real estate sites, and typed in the address. 1227 Hillview Court. There it was. New listing. 5-bed, 3-bath, $799,000. The photos were polished and bright, rooms staged like hotel suites. The kitchen had been redone, all white marble and gold fixtures. Rachel stood just off camera in every photo, but Eleanor could feel her there, arranging tulips, smoothing out the duvet. The caption beneath one image read, "Lovingly maintained by longtime owners, ready for the next chapter." Her name wasn't mentioned. Not once. Not in the ownership details. Not in the seller's notes. Not even in the small legal print at the bottom. Eleanor leaned back, cold calm sliding into her veins. She clicked open her email and forwarded the draft to Mark Cutler, the mortgage officer who'd called her just days earlier. Subject line: Urgent, unpermitted property sale. Co-owner violation. Within the hour, she had a reply. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. I've looped in our legal team and submitted a cease and desist to the listing agent. The property cannot be sold without full legal disclosure from both owners. You're well within your rights. By evening, the listing was gone, scrubbed like it had never existed. But the call came at 9:17 p.m. Rachel. Eleanor didn't answer the first time, or the second. But on the third, she picked up, voice even, spine straight. You're interfering, Rachel said, skipping hello. That listing was private. You made it public, Eleanor said. I found it like everyone else, with one click. You had no right. I had every right. I own that house, legally. Rachel's breath caught, not in surprise, but in fury. You haven't paid a dime on that mortgage in over a decade. Eleanor didn't blink. And you haven't paid a dime in thanks, or acknowledgement, or honesty. You're doing this now, after all this time. You want money? Fine, I'll write a check. Just stop whatever game this is. Eleanor let the silence stretch, cool and deliberate. I'm not interested in a check. Then what the hell do you want? The line vibrated with static, not from the phone, from the charge building between them. All the years, all the swallowed pride and edited stories. The dozens of holidays where Eleanor brought wine and smiled while Rachel played queen of the table. The housewarming parties where Rachel praised her own grit and never once mentioned the $42,000 that got her through the front door. Eleanor's voice dropped a degree. I want my name back. A beat passed. Then Rachel laughed, short and bitter. You're doing this for pride? No, Eleanor said. I'm doing this because I finally remembered who I am. And you're going to remember too. A click. Rachel hung up. Eleanor stared at the screen for a moment. Her hands weren't shaking. Not anymore. Across the room, her printer started spitting out the documents Mark had sent. Formal legal language confirming her co-ownership, her right to approve any sale, her ability to halt any transfer. She stacked the pages, smoothed them once, and slid them into a crisp new folder. For the first time, the war wasn't private anymore, and she wasn't playing defense. The glass-walled conference room at First Community Mortgage smelled faintly of toner and lemon cleaner, neutral, clinical, impossible to soften. Outside, a winter drizzle slicked the parking lot, turning every car roof into a mirror. Inside, the four of them sat in a row that felt more like a lineup than a meeting. Mark Cutler spread a stack of papers across the table, aligning their corners with quiet precision. "Thank you all for coming," he began, voice measured. "I thought it best we clarify ownership before any further action." Rachel crossed one leg over the other, arms folded tight. Her lipstick was too red for 10 a.m., and her jaw flexed each time Mark spoke. Ben wasn't here. Rachel had insisted he was too busy at work. Georgia sat beside Eleanor, a silent ally with her coat still on, the hood bunched against her neck like armor. Eleanor watched Mark's hands, calm, methodical, the same rhythm she remembered from teachers reading verdicts on report cards. He slid the top document toward Rachel first. "This is the original deed of sale, dated December 3, 2013. The down payment, $42,000, was wired from an account under Eleanor Monroe's name. Both parties signed. Here," he tapped the paper lightly, "and here." Rachel didn't reach for it. "I remember the paperwork," she said. "I was pregnant. We were desperate. I thought she was just helping us qualify." Eleanor's voice stayed even. "I didn't help you qualify, Rachel. I helped you buy." Mark continued as though she hadn't spoken. "Per the filed documents, title ownership was split upon purchase. 51% registered to Ms. Monroe, 49% to the Adlers jointly. Those figures were never altered." Georgia gave a soft, incredulous laugh. "So she owns the house, more than half of it." Rachel's face went pale beneath the makeup. "That can't be right. Ben and I refinanced 6 years ago." "You attempted to refinance," Mark corrected gently, "but the title remained unchanged because Ms. Monroe's signature was never removed. The county still reflects her as primary owner." For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the overhead lights. Rachel finally reached for the papers. Her manicured nails clicked against the glossy page. "You never told me this," she said quietly, eyes flicking toward Eleanor. "You never said you kept control." Eleanor folded her hands on the table. "You never asked. You just claimed." Rachel's head snapped up. "Claimed? I made every mortgage payment after year 1. I fixed the roof, I redid the kitchen." "And every time you did," Eleanor interrupted, "you built equity on something that wasn't fully yours. I didn't stop you, but don't stand here pretending you built it alone." Georgia leaned forward, voice soft but pointed. "You accused a builder of drifting, remember? Thanksgiving dinner. Maybe check your own foundation." Rachel turned toward her sister. "Stay out of this." Georgia shrugged. "Can't. Family, remember?" Mark cleared his throat, diffusing the charge before it ignited. "Let's focus on logistics. Mrs. Adler, legally you cannot list, refinance, or transfer the property without Ms. Monroe's consent. Any attempt to do so constitutes fraud." The word landed hard. Rachel sat back, staring at the deed as though it were a stranger's confession. For the first time, Eleanor saw something fracture behind her composure. Not anger, but realization. The image she'd curated all these years, the empire of grace and curated charm, was balanced on paperwork she never bothered to read. "So what now?" Rachel asked, voice low. Eleanor met her eyes. "Now you acknowledge what's real. My name on the deed, my investment, my right to decide what happens next." Rachel blinked fast, fighting for steadiness. "And if I don't? Then the county, the bank, and the IRS will remember for you." Georgia tried not to smile, but the corner of her mouth betrayed her. Mark began gathering the documents again, stacking them neatly, oblivious to the history hanging in the air. Rachel rose abruptly, chair scraping. "I can't do this right now." Eleanor stayed seated. "You already are." Rachel hesitated at the doorway, fingers tightening around the strap of her purse. For once, she didn't have a polished exit line. She simply looked at Eleanor, really looked. And in her eyes, Eleanor saw something she hadn't seen since they were kids sharing a cramped bedroom. Fear. Not of loss, but of exposure. When the door shut behind her, Georgia exhaled. "That was brutal." "It was overdue," Eleanor said. Mark handed Eleanor a copy of the paperwork. "Keep this safe. It's the original." She nodded, sliding the folder into her bag. The paper felt heavier than any object its size should. Outside, rain streaked the windows. Rachel's car idled at the curb, taillights glowing red through the mist. Eleanor watched as the vehicle pulled away, fast, reckless, almost panicked. For 12 years, Rachel had rewritten the story of who built what, who owned what, who mattered. Now, for the first time, the story had documentation. And no amount of spin could erase ink. The dining room at Rachel's house looked different now. The same table, the same perfectly folded napkins. But the air had changed. No one was performing this time. No soft music, no cranberry candles, no curated laughter. Just the sharp, exposed quiet of a family meeting that wasn't meant to be kind. Eleanor sat at the end of the table, Rachel opposite her, hands clasped too tightly. Ben beside her, gaze fixed on the wood grain. Georgia leaned against the wall, coffee mug in hand, waiting. And Lily, unexpectedly, was home from college, standing near the window with crossed arms, watching her parents with something unreadable in her eyes. Eleanor set a single sheet of paper on the table. "I'm willing to sign away my share," she said, calm, steady, "but not for free, and not for the reasons you think." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "You're doing this out of guilt?" "No," Eleanor said, "out of clarity." She unfolded the page, 3 neatly written bullet points in black ink. "First," she said, sliding it toward Rachel, "I want public acknowledgement, not a press release, just the truth. You tell the family, your friends, anyone who's heard you claim you built this from nothing. You correct it. You say my name." Rachel's lips pressed together in a thin white line. "Second," Eleanor continued, "you never again claim sole ownership. In words, in print, in stories. If you sell this place, renovate, move, fine. But you do it knowing I helped build it. And if you ever erase that, I reserve the right to reclaim my share." Ben shifted uneasily. "That's a bit much, isn't it?" Georgia spoke up from the wall. "What's much is 12 years of rewriting history." Rachel shot her a glare. "Stay out of this, Georgia." Georgia raised her mug. "Can't. I was there when she lent you the money, remember? She gave you silence. You repaid her with scissors." Rachel turned back to Eleanor. "And the third condition." Eleanor met her eyes, unflinching. "If you sell the house, you repay me the original down payment plus 10% of the final sale. It's not about profit, it's about fairness." Rachel gave a small, incredulous laugh. "You're serious. Completely." "That's extortion." "No," Eleanor said quietly. "It's documentation. The kind you forgot to read." Ben's voice came soft, almost apologetic. "Rach, maybe we just—" "Don't you start," Rachel snapped, cutting him off. "This is absurd. You can't dictate how I live in my own home." Eleanor folded her hands. "Then it isn't just your home." The words hung there, simple and heavy. Lily's voice cut through the silence. "She's not taking anything," she said, stepping forward. "She's reclaiming the truth." Rachel blinked at her daughter, startled. "Lily, you don't understand." "I understand plenty." Lily's eyes glistened, but her tone was steady. "You told me you and Dad did all this alone, that Grandma never helped. That Aunt Eleanor just drifted off somewhere, but she didn't. She gave you this start, and you pretended she didn't exist." Rachel's jaw trembled. "Not from guilt, but from losing control of the room. I was protecting you from the drama." "There wouldn't be drama if there wasn't a lie," Lily said. Ben cleared his throat but didn't speak. His silence was its own verdict. Eleanor slid a pen across the table. "You don't have to agree today, but those are my terms." Rachel stared at the paper. The list looked short, almost harmless. But to her, it was a mirror, showing everything she'd built on borrowed integrity. She picked up the pen, twirled it once, then set it down like it burned. "I'm not signing that," she said finally. "I won't be publicly humiliated for something that was never malicious." Georgia's voice dropped, soft but firm. "Malice isn't the measure, Rach. Memory is." Rachel pushed her chair back sharply. "You've all lost your minds." She stood, grabbed her purse from the counter, and moved toward the door. "I don't need this. I don't need any of you." Lily's voice followed her. "Then who do you have left?" Rachel froze, just for a moment. The question hung in the doorway like smoke. She left without answering. The door slammed, echoing through the hall. Eleanor exhaled, slow and deep. The house felt smaller somehow, not emptier, just stripped of pretense. Georgia walked over, put a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "You almost gave it up." "I almost did," Eleanor said, "but not anymore." Lily crossed the room and sat beside her aunt. folding her hands in her lap. She'll come around. Eleanor looked toward the door where Rachel's shadow had vanished. Maybe, she said softly, but the truth doesn't need her permission. Outside, the sky was the color of pewter. The first flakes of snow began to fall, melting as they touched the porch rail. And for the first time in 12 years, Eleanor felt something close to peace. Cold, clean, and deserved. Rachel stood by the kitchen window, holding a mug of tea she hadn't sipped. Outside, frost glazed the edges of the back patio, turning dead leaves into glass. But her eyes weren't on the yard. They were fixed on the envelope lying on the counter beside her, the one Mark had dropped off that morning without fanfare or apology. Inside, the papers were perfectly legal. An intent to transfer Eleanor's share of the property, executed through a clause neither Rachel nor Ben had thought twice about 12 years ago. She touched the edge of the folder like it might disappear. It didn't. Georgia found Eleanor at the community center mid-morning, stacking supplies for a local coat drive. She didn't speak right away, just picked up a box of fleece scarves and added it to the table. "You expecting her to cave?" she finally asked. "No," Eleanor said, not missing a beat. "I expect her to calculate." Georgia smirked. "You sound like her." Eleanor turned. "No, I sound like someone who's done pretending guilt is a favor." The hum of a radiator filled the space between them. Then Georgia whistled low. "You ready if someone actually buys your share?" Eleanor didn't blink. "I am the buyer or the warning. She gets to choose." By Tuesday, Rachel had spoken to 2 realtors, quietly, off record. The first dismissed the situation as a family squabble. The second, a younger woman named Marissa, with an unsettling calmness, laid out the consequences with bullet-point clarity. If Ms. Quinn chooses to sell to an outside party, and they pass our vetting, you could end up with a legal co-owner. It's rare, messy, but not unprecedented. Rachel sat in her office, staring at the architectural plans she'd once commissioned for a home expansion that never happened. She dreamed of a sunroom. Now she might end up sharing her foyer with a stranger named Craig from Wisconsin. The next evening, Ben came home with groceries and questions in his eyes. He unpacked in silence until Rachel finally broke. "She's serious," she said, not turning from the stove. "She filed it." Ben paused, setting down a bag of apples. "So what do we do?" Rachel stirred the sauce she wasn't hungry for. "She left me 3 choices: buy her out, accept her in, or watch the house get chopped in half." Ben leaned against the counter. "Then buy her out." "With what?" she snapped. "We're leveraged already. The investments are long game. We'd have to liquidate. That's a year's planning down the drain." "Then let her stay involved," Ben said gently. "Work out a real partnership." Rachel let out a short, bitter laugh. "You think I could stomach her smug presence every time we host a dinner party? Do you know what that would look like? What it would mean?" Ben's voice softened. "It would mean telling the truth." That shut her up. Meanwhile, Eleanor received a call from a buyer in Michigan who was deeply interested and more than willing to co-own if it meant a discounted rate. She didn't entertain it long. She didn't have to. The point wasn't selling. The point was letting Rachel know she could. Thursday, Lily returned to school. No goodbye. Rachel stood in her daughter's empty room later that evening, eyes scanning the unmade bed, the stack of unread books, the jacket slung over the back of the chair like it would be needed again soon. She picked up a note left on the dresser. "Aunt Eleanor didn't make you the villain. You chose that costume yourself." Rachel crumpled it slowly, then threw it in the wastebasket, missing entirely. Ben tried again that night. He came to her study, this time without suggestion or strategy, just a quiet plea. "We need a resolution, Rach, a real one." She didn't look up from her laptop. "Define real." "One where no one's trying to win, just stabilize." Rachel exhaled through her nose. "She wants acknowledgement. She wants dignity." Ben nodded. "Maybe she deserves it." Rachel turned her chair toward him, eyes tired. "You think I've never acknowledged her in my head? You think I haven't looked at this house and remembered where the down payment came from? I just never wanted to owe her that story publicly." "You already do," he said gently. "The only difference is who's listening." Later that night, Rachel sat in the dark of the living room, a glass of red wine warming in her hand. The fire burned low. Across the room, her phone lit up with a new message. Unknown number. Hello? I saw the partial stake listing. I'm very interested. When can we walk the property? She stared at it. Heart beat dull in her ears. Then slowly, she typed a reply. Saturday, 11 a.m. Ring the back bell. She didn't send it. Not yet, but her thumb hovered over the button. Trembling. The envelope came in soft blue, unmarked except for Eleanor's name written in Lily's looping hand. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked between a stack of junk mail and a charity flyer, almost too easy to miss. Eleanor recognized the handwriting before she even opened it. She set her coffee aside and slit the top cleanly with a butter knife. Inside, the letter unfolded in 3 neat pages, handwritten in dark blue ink that wavered slightly, like the pen had paused often for thought. Dear Aunt Eleanor, I wanted to thank you for still showing up when you didn't have to, for sitting through dinners that were half performance, half tension, for never once correcting Mom in front of people, even when I knew you wanted to. I saw you bite your tongue more times than I can count. I also wanted to say I'm sorry. For the things she said. For how she made silence look like strength and truth, look like drama. I used to think you were distant. Now I understand you were just waiting for space to tell the truth safely. I don't really know where home is right now. It doesn't feel like here or campus or anywhere Mom tries to make me stand still. But I know you feel like a place I can go. So, if it's okay, I'd like to visit sometimes. Not because it's family property, because it's you. Lily Eleanor sat very still after reading it. The house was quiet, but her chest wasn't. She read the letter again, slower this time, as if the words might shift meaning if she gave them time. They didn't. Her hand found the edge of the paper, tracing the small indentations where Lily had pressed too hard with the pen. It was the same way Rachel used to write when she was young, every sentence etched like she was trying to prove it deserved permanence. Georgia came in through the side door, shaking snow off her boots. Mail run, she asked, hanging her coat on the hook. Eleanor nodded, eyes still on the page. Something better than mail. She passed it to her sister. Georgia took it carefully, as though it might bruise. She read it once, then again, then lowered the pages into her lap. God, she whispered, voice cracking. She sees everything, doesn't she? Eleanor gave a faint smile. She always did. Rachel just taught her to hide it. Georgia blinked hard, eyes wet. This girl's gonna break the cycle. I hope so, Eleanor said softly. She already started. That night, Eleanor sat at her desk with a fresh legal pad. The same pad she'd used to draft her terms for Rachel weeks earlier. But this time, the tone was different. No leverage, no defense, just intention. She dialed Mark's number. Eleanor, he greeted, professional as ever. I assume you're calling about the offers? No, she said. Something else. I want to set up a trust. There was a pause. For Rachel's daughter? Yes, for Lily. Nothing extravagant. Just enough to protect her right to stay if anything changes. If the property changes hands. If Rachel sells or I do. Mark hesitated. You realize that's unconventional. Eleanor smiled faintly. So is lending my sister a down payment, he chuckled quietly. I'll draft it. Confidential. Completely, she said. Rachel doesn't need to know. The following week, she and Georgia drove downtown to sign the papers. The office was all glass and brushed steel, the kind of place Rachel would have chosen herself. When Eleanor signed her name, her hand didn't shake. Georgia leaned over as the notary stamped the last page. You're giving her a lifeline, she said. I'm giving her something her mother never did, Eleanor replied. Freedom to choose where she belongs. Outside, snow was falling again, thick, heavy flakes that blurred the sidewalks and erased footprints within seconds. Eleanor tilted her face toward it, closing her eyes for a moment. The air smelled like iron and pine, sharp and clean. Georgia nudged her elbow. You're thinking about Rachel, aren't you? Always, Eleanor said quietly. But not with hate anymore, just distance. Later that night, Eleanor sat on the porch, wrapped in a wool blanket. She held Lily's letter again, reading it for the 10th time. Every word felt like a small repair, a gentle stitching over something frayed. She reached for her pen and wrote a note on a small cream card. Lily, you don't need permission to visit. Just come when the sky feels too heavy where you are. Love, Aunt Elle. She sealed it. addressed it to Lily's dorm, and left it by the door for morning mail pickup. Inside, the old grandfather clock struck 9. The sound echoed through the quiet like a pulse. Eleanor took one last look at the flickering light through the window, the reflection of a house that had once been split by pride, now softened by something smaller, braver, and far more permanent. And upstairs, in a drawer Rachel hadn't opened in years, the original deed still listed both their names. Equal owners, equal ghosts of the same foundation. The first thaw came early that year. The snow retreated in slow, uneven streaks, leaving the ground raw and slick. Rachel pulled up the gravel drive on a gray afternoon, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and something unsettled. She hadn't called first. She didn't need to. Eleanor's porch light was on, though it was only 3 in the afternoon, a small, deliberate welcome that felt like mercy and warning at once. When Eleanor opened the door, she didn't look surprised. "You found the courage," she said simply. Rachel stepped inside without being invited. "I found time," she replied, brushing the damp from her coat. They met in the living room, opposite ends of the same couch that had seen too many silences. The old clock ticked between them, each second an accusation. Rachel spoke first, her tone soft, rehearsed. "I didn't mean it that way, you know." Eleanor's gaze was steady. "You meant it exactly that way." Rachel frowned. "You don't even know what I'm referring to." "I know enough," Eleanor said. "The words you threw at me, the dinners where I became your cautionary tale, the stories you told about doing it all alone." Rachel let out a brittle laugh. "It was just a joke." "No," Eleanor said. "It was a script." Rachel's voice tightened. "You think I sat around plotting ways to erase you. I think you learned how to stay powerful by pretending I was weak," Eleanor said quietly. The wind rattled the window panes, a sound like someone trying to get in. Rachel folded her arms. "You've always had a flair for dramatics." Eleanor stood, crossed the room, and reached into the desk drawer. She returned with a single document, a photocopy, crisp and deliberate. She laid it on the coffee table between them like evidence. "The deed," she said. "The one you buried under your version of the truth." Rachel's eyes flicked down, scanning the familiar names. Hers, Ben's, Eleanor's, together, equal. The ink had faded a little, but not enough to erase what it meant. "I kept a copy," Eleanor said, "for the same reason you kept your silence." Rachel exhaled slowly. "You don't need to show me paperwork to prove a point." Eleanor's tone sharpened just enough to pierce. "This isn't proof. It's memory you can't edit." Rachel pushed the document aside. "You really came here to gloat?" "I live here," Eleanor replied evenly. "You came here to explain yourself." For the first time, Rachel hesitated. She looked toward the window, where light fractured through the bare branches outside. "You think I had it easy," she said finally. "But you weren't the one trying to hold a family together while everything felt like it was falling apart. You didn't have to keep up appearances. You didn't have to—" "Lie?" Eleanor cut in softly. "No, I didn't. And look where the truth got me. Alone, maybe, but never confused about what I was worth." Rachel's eyes glistened, though her pride kept her voice even. "You always wanted to make this moral. It's not. It's messy." "It's both," Eleanor said. "Messy doesn't mean meaningless." They sat there, years of resentment flickering between them like static, too long ignored, too familiar to explode cleanly. Rachel looked down again at the paper. "So what do you want?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. She took her time, walking to the mantel where an old photo sat, the two of them as girls standing barefoot in their mother's garden, laughing into a world that hadn't divided them yet. When she spoke, her voice was calm, almost tender. "I want you to stop confusing silence with peace. I want you to stop pretending your version of the story absolves you." Rachel rose, restless, defensive. "You got your acknowledgement, your share, your little victory in public. Isn't that enough?" Eleanor turned. "Nothing I ever had was a joke, Rachel. Not this house. Not the money. Not the debt. Not you." Rachel blinked, startled by the last 2 words. "Me?" Eleanor stepped closer. "You were never a joke to me. You were the reason I kept believing people could change their shape without losing their soul. I was wrong about that." Rachel's throat worked. "You don't get to be the martyr here." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Then don't make me one. Just tell the truth for once." Rachel's composure cracked, subtle but unmistakable. Her voice dropped to a whisper. The truth is, I thought if I kept saying I built it alone, someday it would feel real. Eleanor nodded. And did it? Rachel didn't answer. The grandfather clock struck 5. Shadows stretched long across the floor, cutting through the room in clean, quiet lines. Rachel turned toward the door, her reflection catching briefly in the window. Older, smaller, uncertain. Eleanor didn't stop her. She only said, "You can rewrite the story all you want, but paper keeps its memory." Rachel paused, her hand on the knob. "I didn't come here to fight," she murmured. "I know," Eleanor said softly. "You came here to see if I'd forgiven you." Rachel glanced back, just once. "Have you?" Eleanor looked down at the deed still lying on the table, her name printed beside Rachel's. "Not yet," she said. "But I'm done hating you." Rachel's eyes softened with something that looked like grief, but before either could speak again, the sound of tires crunching gravel filled the driveway outside. Both women turned toward the window, where headlights swept across the porch, white, unfamiliar, and stopping right at the gate. The headlights belonged to a silver Range Rover. It idled at the gate for a long moment before the engine cut off and the driver's side door opened. A man in a dark wool coat stepped out, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the porch like he was casing a memory. Eleanor stood at the window without speaking. Rachel finally asked, "Is that a buyer?" Eleanor didn't blink. "No, not yet." She turned, calm and precise, and walked to the front door. She didn't invite Rachel to follow. 3 days later, Mark's call came while Rachel was in the middle of her morning routine. Half-dressed, espresso cooling beside her laptop, unread emails piling up behind the tightness in her chest. "Rachel," he began, voice clipped. "I'm calling because your co-owner has submitted a private investor notice. As of this morning, she's formally posted a 51% stake for selective sale." Rachel froze. "That's not possible." Mark sighed like a man with a headache he'd predicted. "It's not public, not yet. She's working within the clauses, the ones that allow for minority to majority transfer if no contest is filed within 10 business days." "She wouldn't," Rachel said. "She did," he replied. The email came minutes later. No dramatic subject line, no threats, just a clean, concise PDF attached from Mark's office outlining the updated share proposal Eleanor had quietly filed. It was legal, it was precise, and it was devastating. Rachel stared at it long enough for her coffee to go cold. That evening, Ben found her pacing the back hallway, bare feet slapping against the wood floors like they could somehow ground her. "She's bluffing," Rachel said before he could speak. Ben leaned against the doorframe. "She's not. She'd never actually give the house to strangers." "She wouldn't have to," Ben said. "She only needs one buyer, one partner." Rachel laughed, sharp and hollow. "That would be financial suicide. No one co-owns a family home like it's a timeshare." "She's not bluffing," Ben repeated. "You know that. You've always known." Rachel stopped pacing. "Why are you siding with her?" "I'm not," Ben said. "I'm siding with peace, which hasn't lived in this house for years." The next day, Georgia arrived with her usual unannounced presents and a paper bag of grocery store tulips in hand. She dropped them into the sink vase without bothering to trim the stems. "She knows what she's doing," she said bluntly. "You always thought Eleanor couldn't move without your approval. Turns out she can move without even telling you." Rachel didn't look up from her phone. "She's making a mockery of everything we built." Georgia raised an eyebrow. "You mean everything she helped you build?" Rachel's voice sharpened. "It was still mine." "She still thinks the walls listen to her," Georgia muttered, half to herself. Rachel turned sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means you're still playing queen of a castle that isn't only yours." Meanwhile, Eleanor stood in her kitchen, flipping through a printed inquiry packet from a property fund based out of Vermont. They weren't vultures. They were long-term planners, quiet capital, as Mark called it. They liked historic homes. They liked complicated investments. They liked that Eleanor owned the controlling share. Georgia's words had stayed with her. She still thinks the walls listen to her. Eleanor turned toward the hallway where the light caught on the original molding, on the banister her father once restored by hand. She walked to the dining room and placed her palm against the wallpapered wall. "I don't think they listen," she said quietly, "but I know who they belong to." That night, Rachel sat on the edge of her bathtub, phone in hand, staring at a message she'd typed but hadn't sent. "We need to talk. No lawyers, just us." She deleted it, then retyped it, deleted it again. In the mirror above the sink, her reflection looked unfamiliar, flushed, haunted, suddenly older. She stood abruptly, pulled the plug in the tub though it was empty, and stormed downstairs. Ben was at the kitchen table with a notepad open in front of him. He didn't look up when she entered. "What's that?" she asked, eyes scanning the yellow pages. He shrugged. "Options, equity loans, sellbacks, exit strategies." "You're planning a retreat?" "I'm planning a compromise," he said. "Because you're running out of time." Rachel grabbed the edge of the counter to steady herself. Her voice dropped. "She's going to sell it out from under me." Ben looked up. "Only if you keep pretending she won't." On the other side of town, Eleanor's inbox pinged. One new message. Subject: Investor response. 51% stake proposal. She opened it slowly, then leaned back in her chair. The offer was serious, and the buyer had already seen the house, twice. The buyer's email was clean and unnervingly casual. His firm, an East Coast trust specializing in luxury legacy properties, outlined their intent in 3 bullet points: long-term investment lease potential for private events, shared access to common areas upon co-ownership finalization. Rachel read it 3 times before the words finally landed. They intended to lease the property. Her home, not in theory, not in some distant future, but immediately, starting with summer weddings and historic garden receptions. Ben read it over her shoulder. "They're serious." Rachel sat back, stunned. "They want to rent our lives." "No," Ben said gently. "They want to rent hers, the part she owns, the part she now controlled." By noon, Rachel had called Mark twice. Both times he picked up on the first ring, as if he'd been expecting it. "I don't want this," she said. He didn't ask what she meant. "Then you need to act." "Can we block it?" "Not without litigation, and even if you win, you'll burn every bridge left." He paused. "Or you could speak to her." Rachel leaned on the kitchen island, breath shallow. "She's not interested in talking." Mark was quiet for a beat. "Then maybe she's just waiting for the tone to change." Rachel's hand hovered over her phone all afternoon. Every draft she wrote felt too formal or too pleading. She tried again after dinner, with a simpler message. "Can we talk, just the 2 of us?" This time, she hit send. The reply came 20 minutes later. "If it's about the terms, they haven't changed. Only your tone has." Rachel stared at the screen. The words felt like a mirror, cutting in their accuracy. They met the next morning at the local bakery. Eleanor chose the table farthest from the counter, tucked beside a narrow window where morning light slanted in with no warmth. Rachel arrived late, dressed like she was coming from a deposition, structured coat, sleek boots, no jewelry, control by outfit. Eleanor wore a navy cardigan and a calm expression. Rachel sat slowly, hands wrapped too tightly around a paper cup. "I read the offer," she said. "The lease terms. It's uncomfortable," Eleanor asked. "Unfamiliar. What exactly?" "Unacceptable," Rachel snapped, then softened. "You made your point." Eleanor stirred her tea. "That wasn't the point." Rachel exhaled. "I want to renegotiate." "I'm not renegotiating," Eleanor said quietly. "I'm finalizing." A long silence passed between them. Rachel swallowed. "So what do I have to do?" Eleanor opened her folder and slid a single page across the table. A formal acknowledgement of her 51% ownership share, notarized and waiting for signature. Rachel's hands trembled as she picked it up. "You already had this drawn up?" "I knew the day would come when you'd stop pretending," Eleanor said. Rachel didn't reply. She just signed, one flick of the pen, fast and silent like a needle stitch. The letter appeared 2 weeks later in the Quinn Family Quarterly, a modestly circulated digital newsletter sent to dozens of distant cousins, old friends, and family acquaintances. Subject: Acknowledgement. In gratitude for the woman who built the foundation beneath us, Eleanor Quinn, whose sacrifice made this home possible, whose name belongs not in a footnote, but in the cornerstone itself. It was unsigned, but everyone knew who wrote it. Georgia texted Eleanor a screenshot. "Well, damn. Took 12 years and one power play, but look at that poetry. Eleanor didn't respond. Instead, she stood by the front window of the house, her house, and watched as the sun stretched across the floorboards she helped pay for, the stairs she had never truly been allowed to climb in pride. She folded the letter into her coat pocket. Not for proof, not for pride, for memory. That evening, Rachel sat on the back porch alone. No wine, no phone, just her. Ben stepped out after dark, setting a folded blanket beside her. "Everyone's reading it," he said. "I know. You meant it, though, right?" Rachel stared into the night. "I don't know if I meant every word, but I meant the gesture." Ben nodded. "That's a start." She looked up at him. "I still feel like I lost." He sat beside her. "You didn't lose. You learned to admit you weren't alone." A pause. Then, Rachel whispered, "Is it too late to fix anything?" Ben didn't answer, because down the street another car had just pulled into the drive. The car that pulled into the driveway wasn't a buyer's. It was Mark's. Eleanor met him at the door without surprise, her expression unreadable as he handed her a fresh envelope stamped with the county seal. "The revised documents are finalized," he said. "We filed everything with the clerk this morning. You're back on paper, permanently." She took the envelope without ceremony and nodded once. "Thank you," he hesitated. "You sure you're done pushing?" "I wasn't pushing," Eleanor said, stepping aside. "I was returning." 3 days later, Rachel sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a new set of loan pre-approvals, the edge of each form smudged from her thumb. None of them would move forward now, not without Eleanor's signature. Her refinancing rights, once fully autonomous, were now legally bound to Eleanor's consent. Any equity pull, any line of credit, any future renovation now required her co-owner's hand in ink. Ben entered the room quietly, pausing when he saw the forms spread like fallen dominoes. "They denied it?" "No," Rachel muttered. "She did." That afternoon, a courier arrived at Eleanor's house with a separate set of papers, documents Eleanor herself had added to the new ownership agreement. She placed them in her file drawer without needing to reread them. It was a clause of her own design. If the house were ever to be rented for events, vacations, or private stays, 10% of all income would flow directly into Lily's trust. Not for show. Not as leverage. Just for permanence. Eleanor closed the drawer, twisted the key once, and slipped it into her locket. The final detail? Done. She let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for 12 years. Family dinners resumed, but something shifted in their rhythm. Ben stopped talking. Not dramatically, not with protest. Just stopped. He passed dishes without comment. He nodded instead of speaking. He smiled when spoken to, but the spark behind his eyes flickered like a bulb left on too long. At first, Rachel thought it was work stress. Then she realized it was relief, and maybe grief. Georgia noticed it immediately. She always did. The third dinner in silence, she wiped her mouth with her napkin, leaned back in her chair, and said without ceremony, "That's the silence we needed years ago." Rachel glanced up, unsure whether it was praise or an insult. Georgia just sipped her wine. Too late for blame, but not too late for consequence. Ben didn't speak. He just pushed his plate away and stood. Rachel sat frozen, holding her fork like it might help her defend herself. That night, Eleanor sorted the last of her documents into labeled folders. Mortgage terms, renovation agreements, co-ownership clauses, trust provisions for Lily. The drawer closed with a soft click. Her study was smaller than the one Rachel had taken over years ago. The chair creaked when she sat, but tonight it didn't bother her. She didn't need the bigger office. She had the stronger paper trail. She leaned back, hands resting on her lap. The room smelled like old cedar and ink. The only sound was the low hum of the radiator, steady as breath. The past was now filed, alphabetized, notarized. No more shadows hiding between the lines. Meanwhile, Rachel walked through the hallway in bare feet, the floor colder than she remembered. She passed the gallery wall slowly, pausing at a photo of her and Eleanor from the early years, before Ben, before the house, before the wait. In the photo, Eleanor's hand rested lightly on Rachel's shoulder. Rachel had never noticed the detail before. She touched the frame, fingers trembling. Behind her, the grandfather clock struck 8. No one came to dinner that night. Eleanor brewed tea around 10. She opened the back door to let the cold in, just for a moment. From the porch, she could see the corner of the garden, the spot where the wind chimes used to hang. Long before Rachel took them down to declutter. The stars were faint, the sky low and woolen. She took a sip, then set the mug down. The steam curled upward like something being released. Inside her locket, a small photo of Lily as a child, folded tight beside the key to the file drawer. No page could change the past, but it could damn well protect the future. Dinner resumed as a ritual, not a reunion. Eleanor sat in her usual chair, the one at the far end of the table, closest to the window where she could see the fading light skim across the yard she'd helped pay for. She stirred her soup slowly, the silver spoon catching in the ceramic like a metronome. Rachel had gone all out: linen napkins, roast chicken, rosemary potatoes, wine that matched the food. It looked like effort, it smelled like contrition, but it felt like performance. The table was quieter now, even with Lily home for the weekend. Ben chewed in silence. Georgia picked at her plate. Lily barely touched hers. Eleanor didn't say a word. She sipped her tea after the meal, lips barely touching the rim, then set it down without comment and rose from the table. "I'll take mine in the study," she said. No one stopped her. No one dared. The floor creaked as she left, her footsteps soft, final. Rachel waited until she was gone to speak. "She's enjoying this." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation dressed as insight. Georgia didn't look up from her glass. "No, she's enduring it. There's a difference." Rachel's jaw tightened. "She could at least act like we're trying." Georgia glanced at her. "Trying what, Rach? To play nice at a table she had to fight to sit at again?" Rachel bristled. "She escalated everything." Georgia put down her fork. "You should have thanked her a decade ago, before it had to be legal." Rachel opened her mouth, then shut it. Across from her, Lily finally looked up. Her voice was quiet. "Mom, you made this mess." Rachel turned sharply. "Excuse me?" Lily didn't flinch. She asked for acknowledgement, not revenge. "You're the one who made it a power struggle." Rachel leaned back in her chair. She chose to escalate. Ben's voice came low and even, for the first time in days. She chose to defend herself. That landed. The room went still. Rachel looked between them, seeing not allies, but witnesses. Eleanor sat alone in the study, legs tucked under her like she used to sit in college dorms, books on the floor, heater by her side. The house hushed around her. She wasn't reading. She was thinking. The tea had cooled. She didn't mind. She could still hear the muffled edges of conversation from the dining room, tones rising, falling, clashing. She knew the rhythm by now. It was a song they'd all learned by accident. Some families inherited heirlooms. They inherited avoidance. Back at the table, Rachel pushed her chair back abruptly. "I'm not the villain here." Ben didn't argue. Lily spoke instead. "She never called you that." Rachel turned to her daughter. "But you believe I am." Lily's reply was a whisper. "No, I just believe she's not." Georgia stood up slowly. "I'm going to help her with the tea." Rachel stared at her. "Why do you always take her side?" Georgia tilted her head. "Because she's the only one who stopped making sides the point." She left the room without looking back. Rachel remained seated, gripping the edge of the table like it might keep her upright. Her jaw clenched. Her eyes shimmered with unshed fury or regret. It was hard to tell anymore. Lily reached across the table and touched her hand. Gently, carefully. Rachel didn't pull away, but she didn't return the touch either. In the study, Georgia handed Eleanor a fresh cup of tea. "Still warm," she said. Eleanor accepted it, then offered a small smile. "That's generous." Georgia sat down beside her. "They're talking out there." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "About me?" "Mostly about themselves," Georgia replied. "Which is progress, actually." Eleanor looked at the tea but didn't sip. "I'm not trying to win." "I know," Georgia said. "You just stopped letting them lose you." The two women sat in silence, side by side in a room that had once been too small for truth. Now, it held it comfortably. Back at the table, Rachel stood and walked to the sink. The quiet clink of cutlery against porcelain the only sound left. Ben began stacking plates, not looking at her. "Do you still think she enjoyed it?" he asked, not unkindly. Rachel stared out the kitchen window. The wind had picked up, rustling the bare trees, bending them slightly, not breaking them. "I think she learned how to survive it," she said. Ben nodded once. "That's what you missed." Rachel exhaled slowly, hand resting on the edge of the sink. Her reflection in the window looked like someone else's mother. Upstairs, Lily paused outside the study, one hand on the doorframe, listening, not ready to enter, but not walking away either. The new house sat at the edge of town, a modest craftsman tucked behind dogwood trees, and a rusted mailbox that would need replacing. It wasn't large. It didn't need to be. The porch wrapped around the front like arms too tired to hold more than peace. Lily stood on the steps holding a set of keys that jingled against her palm like something stolen back. Georgia unloaded a box from the trunk of her car and called out, "Left side of the living room's yours. Right side's mine until my hip gives out." Lily laughed, short and light, the kind of sound she hadn't made in months, maybe longer. Eleanor emerged from inside, holding 2 mugs of lemonade. "I labeled the fuse box. Hot water's temperamental, but the bones are solid." She handed a mug to Lily. Then, without preamble, she held out a second envelope. Thick. "Sealed?" "Crisp." Lily blinked. "What's this?" Eleanor smiled, gentle, not proud. "Your name, on the deed. Alone." Lily stared. "I didn't want you to have to guess who belonged to what," Eleanor said. "This is yours. No signatures hiding under paint. No fine print. No invisible debts. No secrets buried under new construction. Just clean ownership, for once." Georgia popped open the back door, letting sunlight and dust spill in. "We'll start with the books. Everything else can wait." Lily followed her inside, but Eleanor stayed on the porch for a long moment, listening to the sound of young laughter moving through old floorboards. She never turned to look back at the driveway, because she knew who wasn't coming. Rachel hadn't been invited. The message had not been dramatic. There'd been no confrontation, no final plea. Just quiet omission, an absence so specific it could only be deliberate. Ben had sent an email that morning. Just one line. "We understand." No greeting, no sign-off, no punctuation. Eleanor never replied. Not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to clarify. The silence between them was finally honest. Rachel stood in the hallway of her own house that afternoon, watching the wind rattle the empty coat hooks near the front door. The hooks had once held Lily's backpacks, George's scarves, Eleanor's umbrella. Now they held nothing. She had gone to the study earlier and opened the file drawer Eleanor once claimed, but it was empty. The key was gone. So were the folders. Only dust remained. In Lily's new home, the living room smelled of pine and cardboard. Georgia was stacking books on the shelf in categories only she understood. "Eleanor had me sign a witness line," she said, almost casually. Lily paused mid-step, a lamp tucked under her arm. "For what?" "The deed," Georgia said. "Just tradition, I guess." Said something about making sure the next Quinn woman knew she didn't inherit silence. Lily smiled faintly. "She's dramatic." "She earned it," Georgia said, slapping her palm against a box marked kitchen, eventually. Later that night, Lily sat cross-legged on the floor with a bowl of pasta and a playlist Eleanor had burned onto an old USB years ago. Nothing curated, nothing polished. Eleanor entered quietly, sat beside her, and passed over a stack of mail. Among them was a manila envelope forwarded from Rachel's address. It was unopened. Eleanor placed it aside, without comment. Lily stared at it, then picked it up, then set it down. They kept eating. Back in the old house, Rachel sat at the foot of the stairs. The hallway light hummed overhead. She'd thought about driving to Lily's new place. She'd even typed the address into her phone, but she hadn't hit go, because she knew, deep down, that whatever apology she had left wouldn't matter anymore. Not when the ink had already dried. Not when the keys had already turned. In the bedroom of the new house, Eleanor stood alone for a moment, looking at the freshly painted wall. The color was soft, a shade between linen and bone. She reached into her coat pocket and took out a tiny slip of paper. A single sentence handwritten in Lily's script. You never had to be big to be strong. Eleanor pinned it to the wall, just behind the light switch. No ceremony, no audience. Just truth, placed where it would always be touched. Outside, the porch light glowed quietly. No wind chimes, no welcome mat, no gate. But when Georgia opened the door to step out for the night, she turned back and said, "She finally has her own ground." Eleanor hadn't walked this part of the neighborhood in years, not since before the court filings. Not since the dinners turned brittle, and every sidewalk reminded her of a fight Rachel hadn't admitted to starting. But now the air felt lighter, even in the early cold of November. She and Georgia strolled slowly, coffee cups in hand, the kind with cardboard sleeves and too hot lids. "You realize this is the first time we've walked without whispering?" Georgia said. Eleanor smiled without turning. "And without pretending we're just getting exercise." "God," Georgia muttered. "We used to schedule truth like it needed permission." They passed a row of townhomes. A couple raked leaves. A dog barked at nothing. Eleanor slowed her steps and tilted her face to the wind. "I didn't expect peace to feel so boring," Georgia laughed. "That's the prize, Elle. Peace is boring, war is loud, but peace stays." Later that day, Eleanor's phone buzzed while she folded laundry. "Lily, 1:14 p.m. I'm furnishing everything myself. No help, no hand-me-downs. Even hung the curtain rods." Eleanor stared at the message for a beat longer than necessary, then typed back, "Now that's something to be proud of." She didn't add a heart. She didn't need to. The original house sold on a Tuesday. It didn't make headlines. It didn't need to. Mark called just after noon with the final wire confirmation. Eleanor's co-owner payout hit her account by 4 o'clock. She stared at the number for less than a minute before closing the app. She already knew where half of it would go. 2 weeks later, she stood in the lobby of Haven House, a women's housing nonprofit near the edge of the city, signing papers with her usual neat cursive. The executive director looked up from the donation acknowledgement form, visibly stunned. "This is generous," she said. "It's overdue," Eleanor replied. "Any restrictions?" "Just one," Eleanor said. "Use it to build something with doors that don't lock behind women when they leave." The woman blinked, then nodded. "We will?" Eleanor slipped the receipt into her purse, turned, and walked out without fanfare. Outside, Georgia was leaning against the car, sipping a milkshake. "You know," she said, "most people keep the check, buy a boat, start a podcast." Eleanor opened the passenger door. "I can't swim, and I already told my story." Georgia slid into the driver's seat. "You built more than a house, Elle." "I know. You built backbone." Eleanor looked out the window. "It was already there. I just stopped bending it." Thanksgiving came sharp and quiet. No centerpiece, no long table. Rachel hosted alone this year. Ben came late. Lily did not come at all. Rachel wore beige. She served too much food. She poured wine before anyone asked. And at the end of the meal, she raised her glass for a toast. "To new starts," she said. The cousins clapped. A few guests smiled politely, but Rachel's daughter, the one visiting from college, the one who had only known half the story until recently, spoke too. She stood, nervous but certain. "At Thanksgiving," she began, "my mom used to say she built everything herself, that she raised me without help, that she kept our house with nothing but grit." Rachel's grip on the wine glass tightened. "But that wasn't true," the daughter said, "and it's time we stop repeating it like a prayer." There was silence, long and thick. Then the girl pulled something from her bag, a photocopy of a deed. Lily's deed, the one with Eleanor's signature, printed clearly beside hers. "She told me I didn't need anyone," the girl said, "but I grew up, and now I live in a house signed by the woman who made my mom believe that lie was worth telling." The room didn't applaud. They didn't need to. Some truths sit heavier than applause anyway. Eleanor never heard about the speech. She didn't need to, because she already knew how stories travel. Not in newsletters or court filings, not even in final toasts, but in what lasts. That night, she lit a single candle and sat on her porch. No wine, no playlist, no regrets. Just her and the quiet breath of a house she no longer had to fight to belong to. The candle flickered in the cold air, barely moving. and Eleanor smiled, not because she won, but because the story, finally, belonged to her.